Welcome to Special Olympics Ontario's Advancement 101 course. During this course, you will learn all about SOO's advancement and identification criteria from provincial qualifiers to provincial games. A fundamental difference between Special Olympics competitions and those of other sports organizations is that athletes of all ability levels are encouraged to participate and have an equal opportunity to advance to a higher level of competition within Special Olympics. Here are some key concepts to know during this course. Please take a minute to understand these concepts. An event defines the discipline within each sport. Heat, a single race in an event. Heat 1 of the 25-meter race has 8 competitors in it. These athletes may or may not be competing against each other for awards placement. Division, the athletes that are competing against each other for awards placement as determined by the previous 2 rounds to determine awards placement. Final round. When a preliminary round is held at a competition, the final round is the second time the event is held. This round is used to determine award placement. An event may go straight to the final round when no preliminary round is being held. Advancement, the identification of athletes to move to the next level of competition in Special Olympics Ontario's competition pathway. The Special Olympics competition pathway follows the traditional sport model of having designated qualifying competitions which are used to determine which athletes advance to the next higher level of the competition. Within Special Olympics Ontario, there are some non-competitive or recreational programs where the goal and focus is physical fitness, skill development, and participation. These programs may participate in a local competition but do not normally attend qualifying competitions. Invitational competitions are hosted by local communities, programs, or organizations, and the emphasis on these competitions is showcasing the athlete's skill development. These competitions do not have an advancement component to them. Provincial qualifiers are hosted by local communities with support from Special Olympics Ontario. All athletes within the designated catchment area that participate in the sport are to be provided with the opportunity to attend these competitions. Results from the PQ will be used to determine which athletes have qualified to advance to the provincial level of competition. Provincial championships and games are hosted by Special Olympics Ontario. This course will look at how athletes qualify from a PQ competition to a provincial level competition. Competition capacity is determined by the organizing committee of each competition. Factors such as facility capacity, accommodations, cost, transportation, and competition structure can all be factors that are used to determine how many athletes would be able to compete at a competition. Quota is the number of spots at the competition that are being assigned to a group. For instance, Special Olympics Canada may give Special Olympics Ontario a quota of 2 teams for basketball. That would mean that Special Olympics Ontario would be able to advance 2 teams from the provincial games to the national games. Now that we understand the advancement policy, it's time to see it in action. In the following slide, we will see the real example of how quota was distributed in a couple of scenarios for the 2016 Spring Provincial Games. Let's start by looking at individual sport advancement processes. To look at quota for the 2016 Spring Provincial Games, we have to go back to the spring sports season of 2015 to have a look at the data from the provincial qualifiers. For this scenario, we will be looking at data from some of the 5-pin bowling PQs that were held that season. They will provide us some insight into how quota is distributed. For the 2016 Spring Games, the Games Organizing Committee determined that there would be a quota of 200 for the 5-pin bowlers. That year, 1,667 athletes competed at provincial qualifiers in the sport of 5-pin. The first step in determining which athletes qualify to advance is to calculate how much quota is assigned to each provincial qualifier. The Special Olympics Ontario sport team gathers all of the data from all of the PQs that are held. This includes not only the results, but also information on each participant, such as age, gender, and the total number of participants. If we look at historical data from 2 of the 5-pin PQs that were held in 2015, we see that 39 athletes attended the 5-hole PQ. That represents 2.34% of the athletes in attendance at 5-pin PQs that year. Since the quota for that sport is 200 athletes, that means that 4.68 athletes would be identified from the conference. Once all conference quotas are calculated, they are rounded up or down to determine how many athletes from each conference will advance to the provincial games. So when we round 4.68, 5 athletes will advance from the 5-hole conference. When we look at the Double Diamond Conference, which had 169 athletes attend that provincial qualifier, we will get a total number of 20 advancing athletes. Special Olympics Ontario distributes quota based on proportional representation. That includes both gender and age representation. To ensure that athletes of all skill levels are given an equal opportunity to advance, an athlete's rank is determined based on their performance relative to his or her peers of equal skill level. Now that we know how many athletes we can advance from each conference, we have to look at the gender breakdown at the competition. Remember, according to our policy, 7,000-304 Athlete Identification Criteria, athlete identification will proportionally represent male and female athletes who participated in the provincial qualifier in the year preceding provincial games. When we look at the gender breakdown of the 5-hole conference, we see that 24 of the 39 athletes were male, which means that 61.54% of the advancing athletes should be male. When you do the math, that means that 3 males and 2 females will advance from this conference. Now that we know how many athletes we can advance from each conference, we have to look at the gender breakdown at the competition. Remember, according to our policy 7,000-304, Athlete Identification Criteria, athlete identification will proportionally represent male and female athletes who participated in the provincial qualifier in the year preceding provincial games. Note that not all sports use age as an advancement qualifier, such as bowling and golf. Now we have to switch gears and take a look at results from a different sport because, as per our advancement policy, bowling identification will be based upon proportional representation for gender. While most other sports are identified based on proportional representation of both gender and age. If we were to look at a PQ advancement spreadsheet for athletics, aquatics, alpine skiing, Nordic skiing, snowshoeing, or speed skating, we would see that the proportional representation calculations were performed based on gender and age brackets. To give you an example of this, let's look at the numbers from one of the swimming PQs that were held in 2015. The Zimmerman Conference hosted 97 athletes, 48 of which were male and 47 were female. They received a quota of 28, which ended up being split down the middle with each gender receiving a quota of 14. When we look at the ages, we see that we have to calculate the percentage of participation for each age bracket relative to the overall number for the gender. So, for the 30 to 39 age bracket, we see that there were 8 males and 8 females in that bracket. We notice that the percentages are different because they are relative to the overall gender number. 8 out of 48 is 17% of the total. In this case, with rounding, both gender/age brackets receive a quota of 2. As you can see, advancement really does all come down to the math. Now we will see how these quota numbers are used to identify which athletes are named to advance. Going back to policy 7000-304 again for a minute, we see that when it comes to the stated sports, athletes are awarded points for how they placed within each event they competed in. An example of what that looks like in an advancement spreadsheet will be shared on the next slide. In the displayed example, you can see that when competition results are compiled for advancement purposes, all athletes are grouped according to their gender and age categories. The places they received for each event they competed in, remember that these places are awarded in their division against other athletes of a similar skill, are used to assign a point balance to each event. Point balances are then totaled and divided by the number of events they competed in. The average point column is then used to determine the advancement order each athlete would be placed in for their gender/age category. If this gender/age category was given a quota of 1, Alec, with a 10 in the average point column, would be the athlete that would be identified to go through the endorsement process. If the gender/age category was given a quota of 3, then Alec, Ben, and Dylan would be identified to go through the endorsement process. From time to time, when we start working with the athlete ranking spreadsheet, we run into athletes whose average point balance is tied within their gender/age category. In those cases, we rely on the policy's tie-breaking procedure to determine which athlete will be identified to go through the endorsement process. In some cases, athletes will be of such an ability that they will be in an ability division by themselves. In order to be fair and objective to all participants, we have developed a process whereby they compete against themselves for placement points. Now we will move on and take a look at team sport advancement processes. While the general principles are the same between individual and team sports, the mechanics differ slightly. The math for determining the quota for each conference is the same as in individual sport. The only difference in application is that at Special Olympics Ontario's provincial game, one quota spot is always reserved for a team from the host community. To look at quota for the 2016 Spring Provincial Games, we have to go back to the spring sport season of 2015 to have a look at the data from the Provincial Qualifiers. For this scenario, we will be looking at floor hockey PQs. For the 2016 Floor Hockey Championships, the Games Organizing Committee determined that there would be a quota of 20 teams for floor hockey. That year, 49 teams competed at Provincial Qualifiers. The first step in determining which teams qualify to advance is to calculate the quota assigned to each provincial qualifier. The Special Olympics Ontario sport team gathers all of the data from all of the PQs that are held. If we look at the results from that season, we can see that 12 teams attended the Dave Hamilton Conference tournament. This equates to 24.4% of total participation. With rounding, this garnered a quota of 5 for the conference. Next, we need to determine how the quota for each conference will be awarded to the participating teams. As with individual sport, Special Olympics Ontario identifies teams to advance based on their results against teams of similar calibers, and teams of all ability levels have the opportunity to advance. Teams will be divisioned into similar ability groups at the tournament. For more information on that process, please see our Divisioning 101 courses. The number of divisions will vary from tournament to tournament, depending on the range of ability of the attending teams. Once competition is complete, quota will be assigned to first place finishers in their respective divisions. If quota allows, quota would then be assigned to second place finishers and will continue in that fashion until it is exhausted. Here is an example of a potential final tournament standings board. The Raiders and Jets won their skills divisions and would have first opportunity at receiving quota. Note that in the blue division, the Flames and Hawks were tied for second place. For advancement purposes, we need to break this tie. To do this, we refer to our tie-breaking policies. In the event of a three-way tie, tie-breaking will always restart at step 1 once a team has been eliminated from the tie and there was not a clear winner at that tie-breaking stage. In this case, the tie was broken due to the Hawks having a lower goals against average than the Flames did. In some cases, quota does not divide evenly into the amount of divisions hosted by the PQ. In this way, winning your division does not always guarantee receiving a quota. If we have to rank order all of the first place teams, we use a slightly modified process. Steps 2 to 5 remain the same, but the total team points becomes the first tiebreak in lieu of head-to-head. In this case, the Raiders would be identified ahead of the Jets based on their higher total points per game rating. Once tournaments are complete and athletes and teams are identified, this does not end the advancement process. Each athlete identified to advance must meet the minimum standards for attending a provincial games. This is determined through our endorsement process, which involves Special Olympics Ontario, the local community council, and coach, as well as the parent/guardian of the athlete. Should the athlete not be endorsed, quota would be returned to their respective advancement grouping and the next athlete would begin the process. Teams must meet minimum roster requirements once the endorsement process is completed prior to being identified for advancement. Once all stages of identification and endorsement are complete, athletes will be named to their district chair training on a predetermined schedule based on when their endorsement process was completed. Thank you for taking our Advancement 101 e-learning course. We hope that you have gained a better understanding of how Special Olympics Ontario's advancement and identification criteria for provincial qualifiers and games are completed.